Racist cop handcuffs black woman, not knowing she's auditing the precinct for systemic corruption today. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Jasmine Brooks stepped into the precinct, her eyes scanning the room with a calm confidence. Dressed in a simple black jacket and slacks, she blended in effortlessly with the mundane bustle of the police station. But what no one knew was that Jasmine wasn't just another visitor. Today, she wasn't here for any routine matter. Jasmine was an undercover auditor from the Department of Justice, conducting an investigation into systemic corruption within the police department. Her mission was clear: uncover the truth, expose the corruption, and make sure the wheels of justice turned. She had trained for moments like this, where every detail mattered, where every step taken could tip the balance between success and failure. As she walked through the precinct, Jasmine remained composed. She made eye contact with a few officers as they passed, offering a polite nod, her expression carefully neutral. She knew how to remain invisible when needed, how to observe without drawing attention to herself. But today, she wouldn't be invisible for long. Officer David Harris, a seasoned cop with a reputation for being less than friendly toward people of color, caught sight of her as she entered the main office. His gaze lingered for a moment too long. She could feel the judgment in his eyes as he scanned her from head to toe. To him, she was just another person who didn't belong in this space. Without any hesitation, Harris stood up from his desk and strode over to Jasmine with a look of suspicion on his face. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice sharp. "What are you doing here?" Jasmine turned slowly, meeting his gaze with a calm, measured expression. "I'm just here to speak with Officer Thompson," she replied, using the name of one of the officers she had been scheduled to meet. Harris's eyes narrowed, and his lips curled into a subtle sneer. "I don't think I've seen you around before," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "And you don't exactly look like the type who would have business here." Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply smiled faintly and nodded. "I'm sure Officer Thompson will vouch for me," she said smoothly. "But if you prefer, I can wait." Harris's eyes lingered on her, his suspicion growing. He crossed his arms and leaned in slightly. "You'll wait out here, and I'll be the judge of that," he said dismissively. Jasmine could feel the tension in the air rising, the heat of Harris's judgment weighing on her. But she remained still, calm, and unwavering. She had been in far more dangerous situations than this, and she wasn't about to let a small-minded officer throw her off course. As Harris turned to walk away, his mind clearly made up, Jasmine's hand slid in her bag and pulled out a small notebook, the pages filled with notes from her ongoing investigation. Her mission today was bigger than any encounter she could have anticipated. Harris's words stung, but they weren't her focus. The real story was what was happening behind closed doors, and she was going to uncover it, no matter what it took. As Jasmine waited quietly in the precinct, the tension in the air thickened, but she held her composure. Officer Harris was still nearby, his eyes occasionally darting in her direction, as if waiting for something to go wrong. Jasmine, however, remained calm. She knew how to navigate situations like this, how to blend in, how to make herself invisible even when the spotlight seemed to be on her. She flipped through her notes, pretending to review them, but her mind was elsewhere. Her objective was clear: to find the evidence that would expose the systemic corruption that had been festering within this precinct for years. Her presence here today wasn't an accident. She had been working undercover for months, gathering intel from officers and sources within the department. Every moment counted. She had to be meticulous, every piece of information valuable. She knew that one wrong move could compromise everything. Suddenly, Officer Harris returned to his desk, his footsteps heavy on the floor. Jasmine glanced up briefly, meeting his eyes for just a second. He quickly turned away, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her closely. His suspicion wasn't just a passing feeling. It lingered, and it was obvious. She could feel his eyes on her, tracking every movement she made, every breath she took. Jasmine's thoughts shifted back to the task at hand. She had to find a way to get closer to the heart of the corruption without alerting anyone. The precinct was full of officers who were part of the network she was investigating, and it only took one wrong word or glance to blow her cover. She knew that the next step would require careful planning, patience, and precision. As she was lost in her thoughts, a voice suddenly interrupted the silence. "You must be Jasmine." Jasmine turned around, startled for a moment, before she recognized the source. It was Officer Thompson, the one she had been scheduled to meet. He had been informed of her presence, but even he didn't know the full extent of her mission. She stood up, forcing a friendly smile. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice steady. Officer Thompson nodded, clearly unaware of the danger that lurked within the walls of the precinct. "I was just about to call you over. We've got some paperwork to go over." Jasmine followed him toward his desk, keeping her movements deliberate, smooth. As they walked, she kept a careful eye on Harris, who seemed to be distracted by something else for the moment. Jasmine knew this was her chance. As she sat down at the desk with Officer Thompson, she felt a sense of urgency build inside her. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. She couldn't let her guard down, not for a second. Thompson sat across from her, flipping through some documents. "So, how's the investigation going?" he asked, his tone casual, as if they were discussing a routine matter. Jasmine nodded, pretending to focus on the documents in front of her. "It's progressing," she replied, "but there are some things that need to be clarified. I'm hoping to go over the records for the last few months." Thompson raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask any further questions. Jasmine had been briefed on how to act, how to blend in with the officers while getting the information she needed. As Thompson handed her a stack of papers, her hand brushed against his for a brief moment. It was enough of a touch for her to gauge his reaction. She could tell he was not entirely comfortable, but he was trying to play along. Jasmine's mind raced as she quickly skimmed through the documents. Every page, every detail could hold the key to exposing the truth. But she needed more than just paperwork. She needed the pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. Suddenly, she heard a faint noise from the other side of the room. A slight shuffle of footsteps, a murmur of voices. Jasmine's eyes flicked up to find Officer Harris watching her again, this time with a more intense gaze. She could feel the weight of his stare. It was like he knew something was off, like he was on the verge of figuring out who she really was. Jasmine kept her face neutral, but her heart raced. This was the moment that could either make or break her investigation. She had to stay calm, stay in control. As the minutes ticked by, Jasmine continued to sift through the papers, her mind running over every possible scenario. She knew that her time in this precinct was running out, and soon she would need to make her move. Every second here brought her closer to the truth, but it also brought her closer to the danger of being exposed. Jasmine's focus remained unwavering as she skimmed through the files, her eyes darting across the pages, absorbing every detail. Officer Thompson sat across from her, oblivious to the true purpose of her visit. His casual demeanor made it all the more difficult to gauge whether he was genuinely innocent or if he was somehow involved in the corruption she was here to expose. She had to tread carefully. Every word, every move had to be precise. The slightest misstep could unravel everything. As she flipped through the documents, Jasmine could feel the weight of Officer Harris's gaze from across the room. His suspicious stare burned into the back of her neck, and for a moment, she wondered if he had figured it out. His unease was palpable, and Jasmine could sense it. There was no way of knowing whether he had pieced together the truth, but she couldn't afford to make it obvious. She had to maintain her cover. Her heart raced slightly as she continued to leaf through the files. The sound of the paper flipping was louder in her ears than it should have been, but Jasmine fought to keep her expression neutral. She wasn't here to make waves, she reminded herself. She was here to collect the evidence that would expose the systemic corruption running through this precinct. Her fingers paused on a specific document, a piece of information she hadn't expected to find. There was a series of names and dates. She scanned it carefully, The names were familiar. They were the same officers she had been hearing about in the rumors, the ones suspected of being involved in shady dealings. She could hardly believe her eyes. This was it, the breakthrough she had been waiting for. But just as quickly as she found it, she closed the file and shoved it back in the pile. Her heart beat faster now. This was no longer just an investigation. This was the tipping point. She had the proof she needed, but now she had to get out of here without raising suspicion. Officer Harris was still watching her, though, his eyes narrow with doubt. He wasn't buying her story, that much was clear. Jasmine could feel the tension in the air. He had to know something was off. The subtle shift in his posture, the way he crossed his arms tighter, it was a clear sign of suspicion. Jasmine took a slow breath, keeping her hand steady as she placed the documents back on Thompson's desk. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice smooth but firm. Thompson looked up, startled by the sudden change in Jasmine's demeanor. "Is everything okay?" he asked, clearly caught off guard. "Yes," Jasmine replied, just a little overwhelmed by the amount of paperwork. "I'll be fine." She stood up from the chair, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. As she made her way toward the door, she could feel Harris's eyes following her every step. It was as if he was waiting for her to make a mistake. She couldn't let that happen. Not now. Now she was so close. As she reached the door, she paused for a moment and turned back to face Thompson. "I'll be in touch," she said with a smile, before exiting the room. The cool air hit her as soon as she stepped outside, and for a split second, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The investigation had just taken a major turn. She had the proof. She had the names. The only thing left to do now was to bring it to the authorities and watch as the system she had been working to expose collapsed under its own weight. But as she walked down the hallway, she could still feel the eyes of Officer Harris on her, and she knew he wasn't done with her yet. Jasmine stepped into the parking lot, her heart still racing, but her mind was already working at full speed. She had the evidence. She had seen the names, the dates, the connections that linked the officers to the corruption she had been hunting for. Her mission was almost complete, but as she walked toward her car, a sense of unease settled over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Officer Harris's stare was still fresh in her mind. His suspicion had never wavered, and she knew that it was only a matter of time before he would dig deeper. He wasn't just going to let her slip away. Jasmine's fingers hovered over the keys to her car, but she hesitated for a moment. Her instincts told her to leave, to get the evidence back to the proper authorities as soon as possible. But she also knew that running away now could make her look guilty. She had to remain calm, stay one step ahead. She took a deep breath and unlocked her car, sliding into the driver's seat. As she started the engine, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her contact in the Department of Justice. "We need the full report ASAP. No delays." Jasmine quickly typed back, acknowledging the message, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew the risks of this operation, but the idea that Officer Harris could blow everything wide open was gnawing at her. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, and the number was unfamiliar. She considered ignoring it, but decided against it. She answered, keeping her voice steady. "Jasmine Brooks," she said, trying to sound professional. "Ms. Brooks, this is Detective Moore from Internal Affairs," the voice on the other end said. Jasmine's pulse quickened. She had heard of Detective Moore before, an officer known for his no-nonsense attitude and his relentless pursuit of corruption within the department. "We need to talk. Now." Jasmine's mind raced as she quickly processed the request. It could be a trap, or it could be her opportunity to finish what she had started. She had no idea how Moore had got her number, but she knew that Internal Affairs was likely watching the precinct closely. She agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe, one she knew was quiet enough to have a conversation without drawing attention. She hung up and made her way there, trying to push the nagging doubts out of her mind. The cafe was nearly empty when she arrived, and she quickly spotted Detective Moore sitting at a table in the back. He didn't smile when he saw her. His expression was all business. Jasmine sat down across from him, keeping her posture casual but alert. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice steady, but her mind was still in overdrive. Moore leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of hesitation. I've been watching the precinct. We've been aware of some strange things going on. We've got eyes on Harris. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She asked, though she already had a sense of where this was going. We've had some reports come in anonymously about Harris's involvement in some activities. He's connected to some of the same names you've been following. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected Harris was involved, but hearing it confirmed sent a cold chill down her spine. What happens now? She asked, her voice low. We take it from here, Moore replied. But I need you to stay out of it. We've got enough to make a case, and we'll move when the time's right. Your job now is to keep your head down and stay safe. Harris is dangerous, and we don't know how far his influence goes. But you've done good work. We'll handle it from here. Jasmine nodded, trying to mask the mix of relief and uncertainty that flooded her. The weight of the past few months seemed to lift for a moment, but she knew it wasn't over. She had done her part, but the real work was about to begin. As she left the cafe, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an encrypted message from the Department of Justice, urging her to return to headquarters immediately. She knew this meant one thing. Everything was about to change. She got in her car, her mind still reeling, but she knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened next, she had played her part in uncovering the truth. Jasmine arrived at the Department of Justice building, her mind still racing from the meeting with Detective Moore. The weight of the past few months seemed to press down on her shoulders, but she knew she had to stay focused. As she walked through the front doors, the familiar scent of coffee and the hum of quiet conversations in the lobby provided little comfort. Her heart was still heavy with the knowledge of what had transpired and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. She couldn't afford to let her guard down now. She made her way to the elevator, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the hallway. As the doors slid shut, she leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out quickly, expecting another message from Moore or her team. But instead, it was a text from an unknown number. We know what you're doing. Stay out of this. Jasmine's blood ran cold. The message was short, and the threat was clear. Whoever had sent it knew about her investigation. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at the screen. She had been careful. She had been precise. How had they found out? Her mind raced with questions, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't let fear control her. Not now. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to the floor where the Department of Justice's investigation team was based. Jasmine stepped out, her mind still reeling, but her face remained composed. She couldn't afford to show any sign of weakness. As she entered the main office, her supervisor, Agent Carter, looked up from his desk, a mix of concern and curiosity in his expression. "Jasmine, you're here," he said, his tone neutral, but there was an edge to his words that she couldn't ignore. "We need to talk." Jasmine nodded, her stomach tight with anxiety. "I received a message," she said, walking toward the desk and handing him her phone. Carter took it, reading the text with a furrowed brow. "This is bad," he muttered under his breath. He looked up at her, his eyes dark with concern. "We've been monitoring the precinct, but it's clear now that you've been compromised. Someone knows what you're doing." Jasmine clenched her jaw, her eyes narrowing. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice low. Carter stood up from his desk, walking over to a nearby filing cabinet. He opened it, revealing a set of folders and documents she hadn't seen before. "We go after them," he said, his voice firm. "But we do it carefully. No more risks. You've done your part, Jasmine. Now we take it from here." Jasmine hesitated for a moment, her mind working through the options. She had worked too hard, come too far to let it all unravel now. She knew she couldn't back down. "I'm not stepping away," she said, her voice steady. "We gotta finish this. I can't let them get away with it." Carter's gaze softened, but he didn't argue. "All right," he said after a moment, his tone serious. "But you're not going in alone this time. We're going to put a plan together, and we're going to move as a team." Jasmine nodded, relief washing over her. She wasn't alone in this. She had never been. "What's the next step?" she asked. Carter turned to the board on the wall, where a map of the precinct and a series of notes were pinned. He pointed to the section that indicated the precinct's internal network. We got to gather more intel. We know Harris is involved, but we need to pinpoint exactly who else isn't on it. We've got sources in place, but we need you to keep your eyes open. Your next move will be crucial. Jasmine nodded again, her resolve hardening. The next step was clear. The investigation wasn't over. It was only just beginning. As she walked out of the office, she felt the weight of the task ahead of her, but she also felt something else, determination. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let anything or anyone stop her now. Jasmine sat at her desk, the soft hum of the office around her, but her mind was focused elsewhere. The room was quiet, the usual hustle and bustle of the Department of Justice floor somewhat subdued today. Her eyes scanned the files spread out in front of her, the names, dates, and notes she had gathered over the past few weeks now laid bare on the table. She had known that. Exposing the corruption within the precinct would be difficult, but now it felt like the pressure was building. The text message had shaken her, but Carter's reassurance had given her the clarity she needed. She had to stay focused. The case was more than just about one or two officers. It was about the entire system. She could no longer afford to look at things in fragments. She had to look at the big picture. As her phone buzzed again, this time with an encrypted message from Moore, she quickly opened it. The message was simple. We've identified another officer. Need you to meet tonight. Details to follow. Jasmine felt a quick jolt of adrenaline, but she kept her emotions in check. This was the moment. The final pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and she wasn't about to let anything or anyone get in her way. She quickly responded, confirming that she would meet. She gathered her things, ready to head out, when Carter entered the office, his face hard to read. You got the message? He asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. Jasmine nodded, slipping her phone back into her pocket. I'm heading out to meet Moore, she said, her voice steady. Carter paused, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. Be careful, Jasmine, he said. We don't know how deep this goes. Stay alert. I will, Jasmine replied. I'm not backing down now. As she left the office, the cool evening air hit her, and for a moment it felt like the weight of the world had been placed squarely on her shoulders. But the determination within her was stronger than ever. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to stop now. As she made her way to the cafe where Moore had asked to meet, her thoughts raced. Who else was involved? How far did the corruption stretch? She couldn't afford to let her guard down. When she arrived at the cafe, it was nearly empty, save for a few patrons scattered around. Moore was seated in the back, his posture rigid as usual, his eyes scanning the room as if he were always on alert. Jasmine approached, and he looked up, his face serious. We've got a lead, Moore said immediately, his voice low. Another officer. Higher up than we thought. Jasmine sat down, her mind now fully focused. Who is it? She asked, her voice calm, though she could feel the intensity building. Moore handed her a file. Detective William Marks. He's been pulling the strings behind a lot of the operations. We've got enough to move on him. Jasmine's heart raced as she opened the file, her eyes scanning the contents. Marks. She knew the name. He was one of the higher-ranking officers in the precinct, someone she had never suspected of being involved. But now, seeing the connections laid out before her, it made sense. So what now? She asked, her eyes still on the file. Moore leaned in slightly, his gaze intense. We need to move quickly, but carefully. We've already got surveillance, but we need someone inside to get the final piece of the puzzle. You're the one who's been closest to the action. You're going to have to go back in. Jasmine's stomach tightened. Going back meant risking everything. She couldn't afford another mistake. But at the same time, she knew this was the final step. I'll do it, she said without hesitation, her voice steady. Moore gave a single nod, and with that the plan was set. Jasmine stood up, her heart racing with the realization that the endgame was near. But she knew that this was it. No more games. No more hiding. She was going to bring it all to light, no matter the cost. Jasmine stood in front of the precinct once again, the weight of the mission pressing heavily on her chest. The building loomed in front of her, its dull gray exterior reflecting the harsh lights from the street lamps. She had been in this position before, but this time was different. This time, everything was on the line. She had the evidence. She had names. And now, she had the final piece of the puzzle. Detective Marks. He was the key to everything. The person who had orchestrated much of the corruption that had been festering within the precinct. She had to take him down, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been affected by the system's failings. She knew the risks. She knew the dangers of going back in. But she also knew that she couldn't back down now. Not after everything she had seen. Not after everything she had risked. Taking a deep breath, she adjusted her jacket and walked through the front door of the precinct. It felt almost surreal. The familiar hum of fluorescent lights, the echo of footsteps down the hall. It was all the same as it had been before. But now, she wasn't just a part of the background. Now, she was the one who would change everything. As she walked through the hallways, she spotted Officer Harris at his desk, his eyes glued to the screen in front of him. His gaze shifted to her for a moment, and she could see the suspicion still in his eyes. He had to know something was off. He wasn't stupid, but Jasmine couldn't let that distract her. She had to stay focused. She had to get to Marks. She quickly made her way to the detective's office, the one where she had first started gathering evidence. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open quietly, stepping inside. The office was just as she remembered it, cluttered with papers, files, and half-empty coffee cups. Marks sat behind his desk, his back to her as he reviewed a stack of paperwork. He didn't notice her at first, and for a brief moment, Jasmine considered just walking away. But she knew that wasn't an option. This was it. This was her chance. She cleared her throat softly, and Marks looked up, a small frown on his face as he adjusted his glasses. "Jasmine," he said, his voice steady. "What are you doing here?" Jasmine smiled, her voice calm. "Just following up on some paperwork," she replied, keeping her tone casual. "I'm almost finished." Marks nodded, still eyeing her with a hint of skepticism. "Make sure you don't get in anyone's way." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. "I'll be out of here soon," she said. She continued to scan the room, mentally mapping out the layout. The files she needed were on the desk in front of her, and the evidence she had gathered was within arm's reach. But she couldn't risk grabbing them just yet. She needed more. She needed him to slip up. As Marks continued to read through his paperwork, Jasmine's mind raced. She knew she couldn't keep him distracted for too long. The clock was ticking, and Officer Harris was still in the building. He could show up at any moment, and if he did, everything would be blown. But Marks was focused, and that gave her the opening she needed. She casually walked toward the desk, her eyes flicking to the files. Marks didn't seem to notice her movement, but Jasmine's hand brushed against one of the files, making sure it was placed just right. A small shift, just enough to make it seem like it had been misplaced. She needed him to move it. She needed him to take the bait. And sure enough, Marks reached over and picked up the file, turning it over in his hands. It was the moment she had been waiting for. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as he flipped it open, and she watched as his eyes scanned the contents. For a split second, Jasmine felt a flicker of satisfaction. This was it. She was about to get what she needed. But then, something changed. Marks's expression shifted from casual curiosity to something darker, something colder. He had noticed the inconsistency. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Jasmine knew. He had figured it out. He knew what she was really doing here. He knew she wasn't just following up on paperwork. And now, it was too late to turn back. Jasmine's heart raced as she locked eyes with Marks, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. His expression was colder now, more calculating. It was clear that he had figured her out. She could feel the tension thickening in the room, the silence hanging heavy between them. Her mind raced, processing every possible outcome in an instant. Marks slowly closed the file, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've been digging around, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low and filled with an edge of menace. Jasmine stood still, her posture unshaken, though inside, she could feel the pressure mounting. She couldn't afford to reveal any fear now. She had to stay in control. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady. Marks let out a short, dry laugh. "Don't play games with me, Jasmine. You think I didn't notice? You've been getting too close. Too much attention." His words struck her like a blow, but she kept her face neutral. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to act, but she couldn't rush this. She had to let him believe he still had the upper hand. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you've made a huge mistake, Marks continued, leaning back in his chair. You think you're some kind of hero, but all you're doing is setting yourself up to fall. Jasmine could feel the heat of his words, but she refused to be shaken. If you think I'm afraid of you, you're wrong, she said, her tone unwavering. Mark's smile faltered just for a second. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. You're playing a dangerous game, Jasmine. You've gotten yourself involved in something far bigger than you realize. If you don't back off now, you'll regret it. Jasmine didn't flinch. She had come too far to back down now. She had the evidence. She had the truth. And nothing Marks could say would change that. I'm not backing off, she said firmly, her voice clear and resolute. Marks stared at her for a long moment, the tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Then, with a deep breath, he stood up and walked around the desk, his eyes still locked on hers. You really think you're going to win this, don't you? He asked, his voice low, almost dangerous. Jasmine's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. It's not about winning, Marks. It's about doing what's right, she said. Marks didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the door and opened it, glancing back at her over his shoulder. You'll regret this, he said quietly, his voice cold. You'll see. Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was on her side, and she knew that. As Marks walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft click, Jasmine exhaled slowly, her mind already shifting back to the next steps of the plan. She wasn't out of the woods yet, but this was a crucial victory. She had gotten the confession. She had confirmed his involvement. And now, it was only a matter of time before the entire corrupt network came crashing down. As she gathered the files and made her way out of the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She knew Harris was still in the building, and if he was still suspicious, then it wasn't over. But Jasmine was ready. She had already been through too much to stop now. She had the evidence. She had the truth, and she was going to bring it all to light, no matter what it took. Jasmine's mind was racing as she left the precinct, the weight of the evidence in her hands and the tension of the past few days weighing heavily on her. The confrontation with Marks had been intense, but it was also the confirmation she needed. He knew she was on to him, but that only made her resolve stronger. She wasn't about to back down now. She had come too far, and she had the truth on her side. But even as she walked briskly to her car, the feeling that she was being watched lingered in the back of her mind. She glanced over her shoulder, but there was no one in sight. Still, the suspicion gnawed at her. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. As she drove through the quiet streets, the glow of the streetlights reflecting off her rearview mirror, Jasmine's phone buzzed. She pulled out of her pocket, her eyes narrowing when she saw the message. It was for more. We've got the green light. Time to move. Meet me at the safe house in 1 hour. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her hands steady on the wheel. This was it, the final step. She had gathered everything they needed, and now it was time to take down the entire network. She turned the corner, her destination just a few miles away, but a sense of unease still hung in the air. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. Jasmine hesitated for a moment before answering. Jasmine, she said, her voice cautious. Who is this? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words were sharp and clear. You've been digging too deep, Jasmine, the voice said, low and menacing. We know what you've been up to, and we're not going to let you take us down. Jasmine's stomach tightened as she gripped the steering wheel. She recognized the threat immediately. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. They knew everything. The voice continued. You're out of your depth. If you think you can stop this, you're wrong. We control everything. Jasmine didn't say anything for a moment, her mind working at lightning speed. She couldn't let them intimidate her. She had come too far, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her now. I'm not afraid of you, Jasmine said firmly, her voice unwavering. I have the proof, and I'm bringing it all to light. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the voice spoke again, this time with a cold laugh. We'll see about that. The line went dead. Jasmine's hand tightened around the phone, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had the evidence. She had the truth. And now, she had to stay focused. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now. As she pulled up to the safe house, she noticed the lights were on, and the place looked secure. She parked the car and got out, making her way to the door. Moore was waiting for her inside, his expression serious but with a hint of determination in his eyes. "You're here," he said, nodding as she stepped inside. "We've got everything ready." Jasmine nodded, her mind already shifting to the next phase of the plan. "Let's get this done," she said. Moore handed her a file, and she quickly flipped through the contents. It was everything they needed to take down the entire network. The pieces were all in place. This was the moment they had been working toward. As they gathered their things and made their final preparations, Jasmine felt a surge of determination. She had fought hard to get to this point, and she wasn't about to stop now. The time had come to expose the corruption, to bring the truth to light, and to ensure that justice was served. She had done her part. Now, it was time for the system to face the consequences of its actions.